She was the heir to an empire until a new queen mother rewrote the laws of the palace. For 10 years, Mary was the heartbeat of the estate, the cherished daughter of a tech visionary. But when her father's heart stopped, her stepmother's reign of terror began. By 19, Mary was a ghost in a designer mansion, scrubbed of her inheritance and serving the very woman who had spent years trying to erase her. Now, with the family's tech venture facing a billion-dollar collapse, her stepmother and stepsister Chloe have found a way to turn their burden into a bank deposit. They've traded Mary to the iron tyrant of the corporate underworld, Si-Woo. They forced her into a silk wedding gown and shoved her into the back seat of a black sedan, praying the tyrant's legendary cruelty would break her so they'd never have to see her again. But as the heavy obsidian doors of his penthouse lock behind them, the man who breaks industries for sport doesn't look at Mary with coldness. He looks at her with a decade of hungry, hidden recognition. The Steph family thought they were selling a slave to a monster. They didn't realize they were returning a queen to her king, and now he's coming for their heads. Would you sacrifice your freedom to escape a family that hates you? Or is the enemy you know safer? Hello, family! Before we see how Mary handles the Iron Tyrant, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your country in the comments and subscribe if you love a story where the villains get exactly what they deserve. Now, let's proceed. The marble floors of the estate used to echo with the laughter of a father and his favorite daughter. For Mary, that house was once a sanctuary of light and legacy. Her father, a man of brilliant code and kinder heart, had built an empire from nothing, always telling Mary that one day she would be the one to lead it. But the light began to dim the moment her stepmother walked through the front door, trailing a spoiled daughter, Chloe, like a shadow of things to come. When Mary's father passed away under a cloud of sudden illness, the sanctuary turned into a cold, gilded prison. Within months, her stepmother had redirected the trusts, changed the locks on the executive offices, and relegated Mary to the servants' quarters. Mary became a ghost in lace, forced to watch as Chloe was groomed to take the seat that was rightfully hers. For 3 years, Mary endured the silent meals and the whispered insults, waiting for a chance to reclaim her father's dream. But she didn't realize that while she was playing for time, her step-family was playing for her life. The tech venture was failing. The legacy was hemorrhaging money. In their desperation, they didn't look for a loan. They looked at the beautiful, resilient girl they had spent years trying to break. They needed a miracle to save their social status, and they decided that Mary's misery was the only currency Si-Woo would accept. They didn't care that the world called him a tyrant. To them, he was just a check with enough zeros to cover their sins. They thought they were throwing her to the wolves, never imagining that Si-Woo had been the one watching her from the shadows since the day her father died. The deal was signed in blood-red ink. The Iron Tyrant was coming for his prize, and the Step family was about to learn that some miracles come with a devastating price. The marble foyer of the Sterling estate was once a place of light, but now it felt like a cold, gilded tomb. Mary stood at the top of the grand staircase, her fingers grazing the mahogany railing that her father had polished himself every Sunday morning. Back then, the house breathed with the scent of cedar and expensive tobacco, a testament to her father's warmth and the empire he'd built from lines of code. He had called her his little architect, promising that one day she wouldn't just inherit his wealth, but his vision. But visions are easily blurred by the smoke of a new marriage. The change hadn't been an explosion, it was a slow, agonizing rot. It started with her father's sudden illness, a weak heart, the doctor said, and the arrival of Eleanor. Her stepmother had entered their lives with a soft smile and a sharp mind for legal loopholes. Beside her was Chloe, a girl whose only talent was a lethal sense of entitlement. Within months of the funeral, the cedar scent was replaced by Eleanor's cloying, heavy perfume. The laughter that once filled the halls was silenced, replaced by the sharp clicking of heels on marble and the hushed tones of lawyers rewriting a legacy. "Mary, the silver won't polish itself." Eleanor's voice sliced through the silence of the foyer, cold and devoid of the feigned warmth she'd used when Mary's father was alive. Mary looked down at her hands. They were no longer the hands of an architect. They were red and chapped from the lye and the scrubbing. In her own home, she had been relegated to the scraps of the estate. She slept in the smallest room in the servants' wing, a space that didn't even have a view of the gardens her father had designed for her. Her inheritance had been restructured into a series of trusts that only Eleanor could touch, while Chloe draped herself in the jewelry Mary's mother had left behind. To the high society neighbors, Mary was simply away at school or recovering from grief. In reality, she was a ghost in lace, a living reminder of a man Eleanor wanted to forget. She watched from the shadows as Chloe was groomed for the board meetings Mary should have chaired. She listened through thin walls as the stepfamily gambled away her father's tech venture on vanity projects and high-stakes social climbing. Every meal was a reminder of her descent. While Eleanor and Chloe dined on fine china, discussing the latest gala, Mary was left with the leftovers in the kitchen. But even as they stripped her of her name and her comfort, they couldn't strip the fire from her eyes. She stayed quiet, she stayed small, and she waited. She didn't know then that her stepfamily's greed was about to hit a wall, and that the only way over it was to sell the one thing they had left, her. The glass-walled boardroom of Obsidian Industries felt less like an office and more like an execution chamber. Eleanor Sterling sat rigid in a chair that cost more than her car, her manicured fingers trembling around a leather folder. Across the polished expanse of black marble sat Siwoo. The world called him the Iron Tyrant, a title earned through a trail of dismantled corporations and shattered dynasties. He didn't speak. He simply stared at her with eyes like chips of flint, radiating a quiet, suffocating danger. "Mr. Siwoo," Eleanor began, her voice thinner than she intended, "the Sterling venture is on the verge of a breakthrough. With a bridge loan of $50 million, we can guarantee a 20% return." "Your venture is dead, Mrs. Sterling," Siwoo interrupted. His voice was smooth, a low baritone that commanded the room without effort. "Your daughter, Chloe, spent the last of your liquid assets on a yacht in Monaco. You are drowning in a sea of debt, and you have come to my fortress to beg." Eleanor swallowed hard, her poised facade cracking. "Then buy us out. Take the patents." Siwoo leaned forward, the faint light catching the sharp, predatory angle of his jaw. "I don't want your useless patents. I want the girl." Eleanor blinked, genuine confusion breaking through her panic. "Chloe? You want to marry Chloe? We would be honored, of course, but—" "Not the parasite," Siwoo said, his tone dripping with lethal disdain. "The architect's daughter, Mary." The name hung in the chilled air. Eleanor's mind raced. Mary? The maid she kept hidden in the servants' wing? Why would a billionaire titan want the ghost of the Sterling estate? But the ruthless calculus of survival quickly overpowered her confusion. If this monster wanted to break the girl she already despised, why should she care? It was a flawless transaction. "She is entirely dependent on me," Eleanor lied smoothly, recovering her aristocratic posture. "Her guardianship, her trusts, I control it all. If you assume the $50 million debt, I will sign her over to you by midnight. But you must understand, she is difficult, a burden." A dangerous, almost imperceptible smile ghosted across Siwoo's lips, a predator watching a trap snap shut. "I will handle her. Have her in a wedding gown and delivered to my penthouse tonight. If you delay by a single minute, I will not only let your company burn, I will buy the ashes and salt the earth." Eleanor didn't hesitate. She signed the contract he slid across the table with eager hands, trading a human life for a ledger of cleared debts. She left the boardroom feeling like a victor, entirely unaware that the man behind the desk wasn't buying a victim. He was rescuing his queen, and he had just acquired the legal right to absolutely destroy the woman who had tormented her. The ride to the center of the city was a blur of neon lights and suffocating dread. The heavy white silk of the wedding gown Eleanor had forced over Mary's head felt less like bridal attire and more like a sacrificial shroud. They had pushed her into the back of the armored sedan without a backward glance, Chloe's mocking laughter ringing in her ears as the doors sealed her fate. Mary clutched her cold hands together, bracing herself for the legendary cruelty of the Iron Tyrant. She had heard the whispers. He was a man with a heart of tungsten, a corporate warlord who dismantled his enemies with surgical precision. She fully expected to step out of the car and into a high-tech prison. Instead, the private elevator opened directly into the clouds. Mary stepped cautiously onto the immaculate dark hardwood floors of the penthouse. The space was breathtaking, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a dominating, godlike view of the sprawling city skyline. But it wasn't the cold, clinical dungeon she had imagined. It was a fortress of commanding luxury, filled with warm amber lighting, towering shelves of rare books, and a massive grand piano sitting silently in the corner. "Welcome home, madam." Mary flinched, spinning around to see an older woman in a crisp, tailored suit bowing deeply. Not a guard, a house manager. And she had bowed. To her. After 3 years of being treated as invisible dirt beneath Eleanor's designer shoes, the sudden display of profound respect was completely jarring. "Mr. Siwoo requested that you be shown to your quarters immediately," the woman continued softly, gesturing down a wide, art-lined hallway. "He wishes for you to rest." Mary followed, the silk train of her gown whispering against the wood. When the manager opened the double doors to the suite, the breath left Mary's lungs. It wasn't a cage, it was a sanctuary. But what paralyzed her wasn't the vast, plush bed or the sheer elegance of the room. It was the impossible details. On a sleek desk in the corner sat a complete set of professional architectural tools, the exact rare brand her father had taught her to use. Beside it, perfectly framed, was a faded blueprint of the very first design she had ever sketched as a child. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She stepped into the room, her eyes darting across the space. This wasn't the careless, generic setup of a monster who had just bought a bride to torture. This was deliberate. This was a room prepared by someone who knew exactly who she was, what she loved, and what she had lost. The Iron Tyrant hadn't dragged her into the dark. He had built her a kingdom. And as the heavy front doors of the penthouse echoed shut in the distance, signaling Siwoo's arrival, Mary realized the true mystery wasn't his cruelty. It was how intensely he had been watching her all along. The heavy click of the master suite door reverberated through the penthouse, a sound Mary expected to be followed by the heavy footfalls of a captor. She stood by the window, her reflection in the glass ghostly and fragile in the white silk, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. When the footsteps finally approached, they were measured and strangely light. Mary squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for a cold command or a cruel touch. "You're trembling," a voice said. It wasn't the booming roar of a tyrant. It was a low, smooth baritone that felt like velvet over steel. Mary turned slowly. Siwoo stood a few feet away, having discarded his suit jacket. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and a wristwatch that cost more than her father's first office. Up close, his presence was overwhelming. He was a man built of sharp angles and absolute authority. But his eyes weren't the icy void she had seen in the news. They were dark, intense, and fixed on her with a look that was disturbingly close to reverence. "I know what they told you," he said, stepping into the amber light. that I am a monster who breaks people for sport, that you were the price of their survival. He stopped just inches from her, his scent of sandalwood and rain filling her senses. They lied about one thing, Mary. You weren't the price. You were the goal. Mary's breath hitched. I don't understand. My stepmother, she said you needed a sterling to secure the merger. Siwoo let out a short, mirthless laugh. I could have crushed the Sterling estate with a single phone call. I didn't need a merger. I needed the woman who spent 3 years scrubbing floors in a house she should have owned, yet never let the light in her eyes go out. He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek before he hesitated, waiting for her silent permission. When she didn't pull away, his thumb brushed a stray tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I've watched you endure them for 1,000 days, Mary. I bought your debt because it was the only way to get you out of that tomb before they finished burying you alive. The Iron Tyrant didn't reach for a weapon or a contract. He reached for a small velvet box on the nightstand and placed it in her hand. Inside was her father's signet ring, the one Eleanor had claimed was lost years ago. Tonight, you aren't a bride of convenience, Siwoo whispered, his gaze locking onto hers with a possessive heat that made her skin flush. You are the mistress of this house. Tomorrow, we begin the work of taking back everything they stole from you. I didn't buy a maid, Mary. I waited a decade for my queen. In the silence of the clouds, Mary realized the man the world feared was the only person who had truly seen her in years. The cage was open, and for the first time since her father died, she wasn't afraid of the dark. The morning sun flooded the penthouse with the clarity Mary hadn't felt in years. But the true change wasn't in the light. It was in the weight of the objects Siwoo placed before her on the mahogany dining table. There was no breakfast waiting, no domestic expectations. Instead, there was a sleek carbon fiber laptop, a thick stack of legal dossiers, and a translucent black titanium card that caught the light like a dark diamond. The world thinks I bought a bride, Siwoo said, standing behind her, his hands resting lightly on the back of her chair. The heat of his presence was a grounding force against the whirlwind of the last 12 hours. But yesterday, I filed the paperwork to make you a primary shareholder in Obsidian's tech division. These dossiers contain every financial transaction Eleanor and Chloe have made since your father's passing. Every bribe, every offshore leak, and every cent they drained from your inheritance is documented here. Mary ran her fingers over the cool surface of the black card. Why are you doing this? You've already cleared their debt. You could have just kept me here, safe. Safety is a cage if you don't have the power to leave it, Siwoo replied, his voice dropping to a low, fierce murmur. I don't want a bird in a gilded room, Mary. I want the woman who was born to lead. Eleanor thinks she sold you into a nightmare, but she actually handed you the keys to her destruction. This card has no limit. These lawyers answer only to you. From this moment on, you don't ask for permission. You dictate terms. Mary looked at the legal files, her eyes sharpening as she saw the familiar logos of her father's company stamped with Eleanor's reckless signatures. For years, she had been a ghost, forced to watch the slow-motion car crash of her father's dream. Now, the tools of reconstruction were in her hands. Siwoo wasn't just giving her luxury, he was giving her teeth. They're planning a press conference for the merger next week, Mary said, her voice steadying as the architect within her began to map out a new blueprint, one of retribution. They think they're going to announce the restructuring of my father's original patents. Then we will give them a different announcement, Siwoo said, a predatory glint in his eyes as he leaned down, his breath warm against her ear. I've already secured your seat on the board. You'll walk into that room not as the daughter they discarded, but as the woman who owns the chair they're sitting in. Arm yourself, Mary. The tyrant's queen doesn't just survive, she conquers. As she opened the first file, Mary felt the last shards of the servant girl fall away. She wasn't just a Sterling anymore, and she wasn't just a bride. She was the storm that was about to hit the only home she had ever known. The flicker of the television screen in the Sterling mansion was the only source of light in a room that smelled of stale wine and desperation. Eleanor and Chloe sat huddled together on the velvet sofa, their eyes wide as they watched the live broadcast from the Seoul Financial Center. The headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen was a knife to their throats. Obsidian Industries appoints new majority shareholder for tech division. Then she appeared. Mary stepped out of a sleek black sedan, her presence commanding the camera's lens with an intensity that silenced the crowd. She wasn't wearing the stained apron or the frayed lace of her ghost years. She was draped in a tailored charcoal suit that screamed of silent, untouchable wealth. Her hair swept back to reveal the sharp, regal lines of a woman who had finally stepped into the light. Beside her, Si-woo walked with a hand possessively on the small of her back, his expression a warning to anyone who dared breathe in her direction. That's my mother's necklace," Chloe hissed, her voice cracking with a mixture of disbelief and venom. "How is she wearing that? How is she even standing? She was supposed to be in a cellar begging for her life." Eleanor gripped her glass so hard the stem threatened to snap. "He didn't break her," she whispered, the realization dawning like a cold sweat. "The tyrant didn't break her. He's crowned her." The envy was a physical rot in the room. For 3 years they had derived their power from Mary's subjugation, convinced that her suffering was the foundation of their status. Seeing her now, radiant, powerful, and protected by the most dangerous man in the country, felt like a personal assault. They had sold her to save their company, but in doing so, they had given her the one thing they couldn't control, an ally with the power to erase them. "We have to get her back," Chloe demanded, turning to her mother with wild eyes. "If she has that kind of influence, she can save the tech venture. We just have to remind her that we're family. We'll tell her we did it for her protection, that we knew Si-woo would love her." Eleanor's eyes sharpened with a familiar predatory gleam. The panic was being replaced by a frantic, delusional greed. "You're right. She was always soft. She always wanted our love. We'll play the victims, Chloe. We'll invite her to a peace dinner, tell her how much we miss her, and then we'll find a way to make her sign those patents back over to us. She's still just a girl playing dress-up in a tyrant's house. She won't see it coming." They watched as Mary turned to the cameras and smiled, a cold, beautiful smile that didn't reach her eyes. Eleanor didn't realize that the girl who wanted their love had died the moment the obsidian doors of the penthouse closed. They were planning to lure a ghost into a trap, unaware that they were actually inviting a reaper to their table. The invitation arrived as a handwritten note, smelling of the same heavy perfume that had once signaled Mary's misery. Eleanor called it a peace offering, a desperate plea to reconcile before Mary fully committed to her new life. Si-woo had watched her read it, his eyes narrowing with a dark, protective suspicion. "A snake does not offer an olive branch without a hidden fang," he had warned, his voice a low vibration of concern. But Mary, tethered by the ghost of her father's memory and a lingering need to look her tormentors in the eye from a position of power, decided to attend. The Sterling mansion felt smaller than she remembered, the grandeur now a peeling mask of insolvency. Eleanor and Chloe were waiting in the formal tea room, draped in modest fabrics as if they were the ones who had suffered. The air was thick with a calculated, suffocating sweetness. Eleanor actually wept, clutching Mary's hands with a frantic, trembling grip. "We were terrified, Mary. The debt was a monster at our door. We thought Si-woo was the only one powerful enough to keep you safe from the creditors." Chloe, usually a fountain of venom, sat with her head bowed, pushing a velvet-lined box across the table. "We found these in the vault, your father's private encrypted drives. We thought you should have them to help you lead the tech division." It was the perfect bait. Mary's heart, still tender where her father was concerned, softened for a fraction of a second as she reached for the box. That second was all they needed. While Eleanor distracted her with a manufactured story of a childhood memory, Chloe's fingers were busy beneath the table, triggering a remote alert to a prearranged contact. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors burst open. It wasn't the house staff, but a small swarm of private security auditors and a lawyer Eleanor had kept on a secret retainer. In the chaos, Eleanor's face transformed from a grieving mother to a triumphant demon. She lunged forward, grabbing the box Mary was holding and spilling its contents, to reveal not just her father's drives, but a folder of Siwoo's most sensitive, classified internal blueprints. Blueprints Mary had never seen. "Mary, how could you?" Eleanor shrieked, her voice a masterclass in feigned horror. "We invited you here for a family dinner, and you brought stolen trade secrets to sell to our competitors? You're using our home as a dead drop for corporate espionage." Mary stood frozen as the lawyer began filming the scene, capturing the stolen documents in her hands. The trap had snapped shut with terrifying precision. The Step family wasn't just trying to reclaim their money, they were trying to sign her death warrant. They knew the Iron Tyrant's one rule: betrayal is met with total erasure. As they prepared to leak the evidence to the press, Mary realized her desire for closure had led her into a war where the only outcome was ruin. The laughter in the tea room was a jagged, ugly sound. Eleanor stood over the scattered documents like a vulture over a kill, her phone already pressed to her ear as she prepared to leak the scandal to the press. Chloe smirked, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of seeing Mary finally dragged back down into the dirt. "You thought you were a queen, Mary," Chloe hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "But you're just a common thief. Let's see if your tyrant still wants you when he realizes you're nothing but a spy." Mary didn't move. She watched them, not with the terror they expected, but with a profound final realization that the people who had raised her were truly beyond redemption. She had come looking for a ghost of a family, but she found only predators. Then the air in the room changed. It didn't just turn cold, it became heavy, as if the oxygen itself were being crushed out of the space. The grand oak doors of the mansion were thrown open with a violence that sent the hired lawyer stumbling back. Siwoo stepped into the foyer, his presence a dark, terrifying storm that silenced Eleanor's manufactured screams. He didn't arrive with a crowd, he arrived with a singular, lethal focus. "Siwoo!" Eleanor cried, rushing toward him and thrusting the folder of evidence into his chest. "Thank God you're here! We caught her! She was stealing your secrets, trying to destroy Obsidian from the inside." Siwoo didn't look at the folder. He didn't even acknowledge Eleanor's existence. His eyes were fixed on Mary, scanning her for any sign of a touch that wasn't hers to give. When he saw the way she stood, shoulders back but eyes filled with a weary disappointment, the mask of the Iron Tyrant shifted into something far more dangerous. He reached out, taking the folder from Eleanor's trembling hands. Without breaking eye contact with Mary, he tossed the evidence into the roaring fireplace behind the tea table. "Did you really think?" Siwoo's voice was a low, vibrating growl that made the windows rattle. "That I wouldn't be watching every breath you took in this house? Did you think I hadn't already traced every penny of the bribe you paid that lawyer to stage this?" Eleanor's face drained of all color, the fake tears drying instantly on her cheeks. "No, she stole them. We have proof." "The only proof I care about," Siwoo said, stepping toward her until Eleanor was forced back against the furniture, "is that you dared to lay a trap for the woman who belongs to me. You traded her to settle a debt, but you forgot to read the fine print. With a single tap on his phone, the security auditors Eleanor had hired suddenly turned, their posture shifting as they looked to Siwoo for orders. As of 60 seconds ago, Siwoo whispered, the Sterling name is officially bankrupt. This house, the furniture, the clothes on your backs, they all belong to Mary now, and she has no use for trash. He walked to Mary, his hand sliding possessively into hers, pulling her into the safety of his shadow. Behind them, Eleanor and Chloe began to shriek as the reality of their total erasure set in, but Mary didn't look back. The tyrant's wrath was silent, efficient, and final. He hadn't just saved her, he had dismantled the world that dared to hurt her. The air at the summit of the obsidian tower was thin and crisp, carrying the electric hum of a city that now bowed to a new name. Mary stood at the edge of the glass-railed terrace, her silhouette framed by the golden sprawl of the horizon. She wasn't wearing the white silk of a sacrificial bride tonight. She wore a suit of deep midnight blue, the color of a storm that had finally passed. In her hand, she held a single tablet displaying the final liquidation of the Sterling estate. Every brick of the mansion, every piece of her mother's stolen jewelry, and every patent her father had ever dreamed of had been restored to her. Beside her, Siwoo appeared like a silent, protective shadow. He didn't speak immediately. He simply stood with her, his presence a constant grounding heat against the evening chill. He had dismantled an empire to build her a throne, yet as he looked at her, his expression held none of the iron-cold detachment the world feared. To the public, he was the tyrant who had swallowed the Sterling legacy whole. To Mary, he was the sanctuary she had stopped believing in years ago. "It's done," she whispered, the wind catching the words. "No, Mary," Siwoo replied, his voice a low, smooth rumble as he stepped closer, his hand coming to rest on the small of her back. "It's beginning. You aren't just an heir anymore. You are the architect of everything that comes next." Below them, in the crowded, neon-lit streets she had once walked as a ghost, two figures stood outside a transit station, clutching plastic bags of their remaining belongings. Eleanor and Chloe looked up at the glowing logo of the obsidian tower, their faces twisted with a bitterness that would never fade. They had tried to sell a girl they thought was a burden, only to realize too late that they had traded away the only person who could have saved them. They were now the ghosts, relegated to the scraps of a world they no longer owned. Mary didn't look down. She didn't need to gloat. The weight of the past had finally lifted, replaced by the heavy, beautiful reality of her own agency. She turned away from the edge, walking into the warmth of the penthouse with the man who had seen her worth when she was invisible. The debt was paid, the shadows were gone, and the queen was finally home. The debt is finally paid, and the girl they tried to break is now the woman who owns them. Watching Eleanor and Chloe left with nothing but the dust of the legacy they squandered reminds us that some debts are settled with more than just money. They are settled with the truth. But it makes you wonder, if you were in Mary's shoes, would you have walked away with your head held high, or would you have made sure they felt every bit of the cold you lived in for years? Is revenge a dish best served with a billion-dollar empire, or is simply outgrowing your past the ultimate win? I'd love to hear your take on that in the comments below. And while you're down there, don't forget to tell me which part of the world you're tuning in from today. I love seeing how far our community reaches. If you enjoyed this journey from the shadows to the throne, show some love by hitting that like button. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a tale of justice, power, and dark obsession. Until next time, remember, the person you underestimate today might just be the one holding your future tomorrow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.